Did you know that the idea of praying with your eyes closed is actually not found in the Bible? In this video, I'm going to show you how people in the Bible prayed, and maybe this will change the way that you pray. The first passage that I want to show you is found in the Gospel of John, where Jesus is about to call Lazarus out of his tomb. In John chapter 11, verses 41 to 43, it says, "So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, 'Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I knew that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing around, I said this so that they may believe that you sent me.' And when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come forth.'" So here Jesus didn't close his eyes in prayer, but rather he looked up towards heaven. The next passage is known as Jesus' high priestly prayer, prayed before the night of his crucifixion. In John chapter 17, verse 1, it says, "Jesus spoke these things, and lifting up his eyes to heaven, he said, 'Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you.'" So what did Jesus do with his eyes? He lifted them up towards heaven. Also, when Jesus feeds the 5,000 in all three of the synoptic gospels, Jesus looks up towards heaven and blesses the food. So that's an extra 3 verses where it shows us that Jesus looked up to heaven when he prayed. Lifting up your eyes to God was a way of appealing to and looking to God for help. In Psalm 123 verse 1, it says, "To you I lift up my eyes, the one enthroned in the heavens." In Psalms 121 verse 1, it says, "I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come?" Idol worshippers lifted up their eyes to idols, and we can see this in Ezekiel chapter 18, verses 6, 12, and 15. And when King Nebuchadnezzar went mad because of his pride towards God, it was only after he lifted his eyes to God that his sanity was restored. In Daniel chapter 4, verse 34, it says, "But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes toward heaven, and my knowledge returned to me. And I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation." When King Solomon stretched out his hands in prayer during the dedication of the temple, and when Daniel opened his windows and prayed towards Jerusalem, it makes sense to imagine that they did so with their eyes open. Now, sometimes people looked down when they prayed, but they looked down because they were ashamed of their sins. In Luke chapter 18, verse 13 to 14, it says, "But the tax collector, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his chest, saying, 'God, be merciful to me, the sinner.'" Here the tax collector is too ashamed to look up to heaven, so he looks down instead. The normal way of prayer is actually to look up, but when someone is ashamed, they look down. In Ezra chapter 9, verses 5 and 6, it says, "But at the evening offering I arose from my affliction, even with my garment and my robe torn, and I fell on my knees and stretched out my hands to Yahweh my God, and said, 'O my God, I am ashamed and humiliated to lift up my face to you, my God, for our iniquities have multiplied over our heads, and our guilt has become great even to the heavens.'" So here in this passage in Ezra, we see another example of someone who is just too ashamed to look up towards heaven to pray because of the sins of the people. Now I want to show you one more Bible passage in Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 to 39, where Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it says, "Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, 'My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me.' And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed, saying, 'My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will.'" So here in this passage, we see that Jesus falls face down and prays. But I would say this is because he was so overwhelmed with what was about to happen. He was deeply troubled. He was deeply grieved, just so overwhelmed with what was about to come. But as a general pattern, I would say that most people in the Bible actually lifted up their eyes towards heaven to pray. So this idea that we have to close our eyes during prayer is something that nowadays we probably tend to do out of habit. It's something that perhaps we're trained from a young age to do. And often it's something that we hear from the front of the pulpit as well. You know, when the pastor is about to pray, they can sometimes say, you know, bow your head as we pray for God's blessings and things like that. But as a general rule, closing your eyes in prayer is actually not something that we have to do, and it is okay to pray with your eyes open and lifted up towards heaven. I hope you've liked this video. If you have, please leave me a comment and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the comments and you'll see me in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.